Hi, my name's Evan, and in this video I'm going to help you pick the best podcast mic for you. And we're going to talk things like the output of the mic, whether or not you need an audio interface, whether you get a dynamic or condenser mic, and what other accessories you might need for good results. So let's jump in. The first thing we want to talk about here is looking at this MXL 990 is the output. So is it going to be an XLR output like this MXL 990 has, and which is pretty much industry standard for audio equipment? But the problem with a XLR is that you will need a separate audio interface, which will end up costing you some extra money, generally speaking. Sometimes you can find really affordable packages, like this, that include everything you would need, and then you would plug the audio interface here into your computer via USB. So that's one approach. Ultimately, generally, if you have a good microphone, a good audio interface, that will give the most professional results. But they also have microphones, for example, like the Samsung mic, that are USB only. And these would just plug directly into your USB slot. The good thing about these is they're super easy to use. You don't need an audio interface. But as cord technology changes over the years, drivers, interfaces, who knows if these will be as relevant. And they tend not to have as good sound quality, but not always. And then finally, the other option, common thing you see would be like, for example, with this lavalier mic, which clips right onto your shirt or something like that, and then would go in through, I think this is an 1/8-inch cable. So these are kind of the different things you'll see. You might also see a 1/4-inch cable, and you would need you'd probably need an audio interface, although some laptops or computers might have a sound card that could take a cable like that in. So the first thing to consider is whether or not you've got the right cable. The next thing to consider is whether or not your microphone needs phantom power. Now this is generally only going to be XLR mics, and specifically even amongst those XLR mics, condenser mics. We'll talk about the difference between condenser mics and dynamic mics in a second, but essentially a condenser mic will generally need something called phantom power, also sometimes labeled as 48V. Most audio interfaces these days, most mixers will include at least 1 or 2 channels of phantom power, but they may not have phantom power on every channel. So let's say you've got like a 10-channel mixer and you were hoping you could plug in 10 mics. They may not have sufficient phantom power for that. So make sure that if you are getting a mic that requires phantom power, you have enough phantom power slots or 48V slots to plug them in. If you don't have a condenser mic that requires it, then you don't need to worry about it. The next thing to think about is the dynamic versus condenser mic. And to just really simplify things, a condenser mic generally is more sensitive, especially to high frequencies, and it not only has a more sensitive frequency response from high frequencies to low frequencies, which is, I'm using a condenser over here, but it also has a rounder, broader range of places that it will pick up sound from. Generally, they might be what's termed omnidirectional, meaning they pick up sound from all sides, which is why, even though that's not pointed at me, it's picking things up just fine. These can be great if you've got several people having a conversation and you want to try and capture it all with one microphone. If you've got a decently quiet studio space and you want to get a really good result for your voice. The other option is what's called a dynamic mic. And I can't find my good dynamic mic. I've just moved and it's hidden away somewhere. But this is also a dynamic mic here. And basically, these are a little more rugged. They pretty much just pick up the sound that is directly in front of them. And they do it in a slightly less sensitive frequency range. But they still can sound incredibly professional. And in fact, the number one mic I'd recommend for podcasts, the Shure SM7, SM7DB, and MV7 are all dynamic mics. These are great when you want to have multiple people, they're great if you want to have multiple people each having their own individual mic, so you can record them and then mix them separately. They're great if you are recording in a loud space. Let's say you've got a lot of traffic, or maybe you've got kids yelling in the background, or maybe your parents are yelling in the background. Those are the type of situations where a dynamic mic is great because it rejects a lot of the sound you don't want to hear. And the last consideration I would say is just sort of how are you going to mount your mic and the other accessories. So, for example, with the MXL 990, you would need to get a microphone stand, and I would highly recommend a boom mic stand like this that you can adjust, you can move around. You'll also probably want to get a pop filter no matter what your mic is, assuming that it doesn't come with the package you're using. Now, if you're not speaking directly into the mic, you don't necessarily need the pop filter. Right now, I'm not speaking into this mic, so the pop filter isn't filtering anything. But if you're going to be pointing your mic at you, you should have a pop filter between you and the mic. Some, whether it's dynamic or condenser, some like the SM7 kind of include a built-in one, but others don't. Some mics will have a clip, like this one can actually clip right on the top of your laptop. So that can be really helpful if you have a light setup. Or when you've got like a lavalier mic, you would just clip it onto your shirt, which could be useful if you have guests or if maybe you're moving around on your podcast, you're doing live in the field stuff. So basically, when it comes to buying a podcast mic, there's a lot of great choices out there, but you do need to think about what you're getting and why. I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching.